Welcome to the week 2 stitch out. As you can see, I have got my scratch fabric loaded back up. Got some contrasting thread. I think it's kind of a blue this time. I digitized a curvy design very similar to what's in your drawing handout that you've been drawing on this week. And I left it's got some imperfections for sure. So I went ahead and left those. Didn't try to redo it because I want to point out some places where it doesn't look all that great and what I might do to fix it. And this is no different than the discussion we've been having about your drawings. After I am done filming the stitch out, which is going to be done on a tripod, so I will move the camera a little bit, but it'll be a lot steadier than it was last week, and hopefully I have it mostly centered. But after I stitch it out in this blue thread, I'm going to go ahead and switch to a much lower contrast thread and stitch it again and then show you what that looks like, so you can see what a huge difference the thread choice, the thread color makes, that even in its perfections, I think with its imperfections, this design is going to look pretty okay. Not perfect, but okay. So as I said, the design is ready to go. It's stitched out the spine already and it's ready to do the base. And I'm going to go ahead and let it get started and we'll see what happens. Whoop. A little too close here with those first feathers. Once the machine gets out of our way, we'll be able to see those a little bit better. I did take off one of my light bars to try to be able to get in here nice and close. But you'll notice on those first base feathers, I kind of let them, they're a little bit potato chippy. They could have been a little bit flatter, but I'm not unhappy with them the way they are, so I was just going to leave them. And so then this design is just going to keep stitching on up. And I will try to zoom in and not out. You'll notice there I really missed that spine pretty badly, I guess. And of course the IQ, the IntelliQuilter, is doing exactly what I told it to. Darn computers are only as good as the instructions they're given. Remember, these feathers are freehand, and so the goal for me is definitely not perfection. It's getting it done, and my style is definitely a lot less formal than others. You know, if you really want perfect, you certainly can. You know, there's nothing stopping you from really slowing down, really taking your time, making sure you're hitting all those backtracks as closely as you can. I think that's the big thing, is finding the right speed for yourself. I find I can sometimes go too slow, but then I can also go too fast. And so there's like I said, kind of a fine line of finding the right choice for you. Whoops, too close. Whether you're going so that you're getting it just right, finding the right speed for what you want to do. And you might need to try going a little faster or a little slower and seeing what happens. There's no one right answer. It's all really up to you. As it comes up and does the teardrop at the very top, it's going to go out and do that teardrop, and then you'll note I usually stitch back down the spine a little ways before I stop and do a tiny little bit of a backtrack. That's how I usually end it. I don't want to end that top feather too far up to the top, because you want to kind of maybe bury that backtracking a little bit. So I am going to pull the camera off of the tripod here and just get in just a hair closer to the stitching that I just did here. And it's definitely You know, not perfect by any means, but I think you can see some feathers that are pretty nice. But then down here at the base, I would say that these guys are definitely more potato chippy than I would like. And I will take a still picture of them and draw on top of that and show you what I might do differently. You'll also notice on the inside of the curve right here, where I'm going to try to zoom in, you'll notice that I didn't retrace as much of the top of that feather right there as I normally do, and sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you need to flatten things out a little bit as you go around the inside of a curve. And that's okay. That's what's going to help you make them nestle together. And you'll also notice that my feathers aren't definitely not all the same shape or size. Some of them stretch out a little bit further. Again, I think that's the kind of interest and beauty of doing them freehand. So I'm going to go ahead and switch thread and put in something less contrasting, and we'll see what this stitch out looks with less contrasting thread, because some of those, you know, those places where I missed the backtracking, it's kind of And if I were leaving it in contrasting thread, I would have tried much harder to get the backtracking to hit. So we'll see what it looks like with a different thread.
I'm here now at my computer because when I tried to take a video of the light color thread on this purple fabric, there was something funky about the combination of the fabric and the light color thread, and the camera couldn't seem to actually focus. And I watched it and my eyes went all wiggy. So I decided to go ahead and just go with the still videos and point out a few things about these two plumes. Obviously here on the left is my plume done with what is actually a lavender thread. On the right is that slate bluey kind of thread. And from where I'm sitting, even though the stitch outs are identical in terms of the computer did them both, so they're the same thing, the one on the left in the light color thread, it looks a whole lot better. Obviously there's some issues with photography. It's much harder to get a picture of that light color thread. I did have to adjust it a little bit with the with Photoshop here, so it's not quite true, you know, to colors and stuff, but in general, you can, and I guess you could say you could trust me that the light color stitch out looks much better than the dark color stitch out. Some of these places, like in here, where I really clearly missed the spine, and I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in on this one, you know, and show you that, yeah, I really did miss the spine on those, but it's not nearly as noticeable. So the other thing I was going to do real quickly while I'm here is zoom in a little bit, and I've got my pen in hand, and I was just going to just draw over top of these base feathers just how I would have maybe liked to have seen them differently. And I wasn't sure if I made myself clear in the previous video. It's not that I would actually take these feathers out. I would leave them, but they would have looked better if I hadn't made them quite so fat right here. I really kind of zipped out further than I needed to. So if I'm not going to try to retrace with this pen, make these the angle there a little bit differently and actually fit in an extra feather, I guess. So obviously now I'm off of what I was doing before, but if I go and do the same over on this side, I think you'll see kind of what I was talking about in terms of flattening this middle part of the feather. That's the part that tends to want to go potato chippy. It just really wants to swing way too far out, and we want to keep nice and skinny here, and then make sure that our tops are nice and round. Another thing I'll point out while I'm zoomed in nice and close is obviously I did not hit this previous feather. I mean, it's not great, but frankly I find that acceptable in just in general with the overall look. I think that looks better than, I guess I'd rather see that rather than stitching too far into the previous feather. This one isn't real bad, but that's just an example of something that I think could look better. Just kind of zoom up here and look at the rest of this. Obviously, I didn't quite get the backtracking all perfectly, but you know, it's. I've said it before. These are freehand. This is my style, and I find this acceptable. The last thing I was just going to say at the end of the stitch out video, when I talked about how the teardrop, I stitched the teardrop in and then I backtracked down. I didn't actually, apparently when I did this, I didn't actually hide the end very cleanly, and so I might have maybe, actually I'll switch over and zoom in on that so you can see where I ended that, because I was talking about backtracking so that I could hide it, and I think that this right here is where that ended. Oh, hello. Let me draw. There we go. And so that's maybe not the most elegant ending I could have done, but obviously the dark thread makes it look a lot more noticeable than the light thread did. So just yet again pointing out the difference in a low contrast thread with a high contrast. If I'd really tried to do feathers in high contrast, I would have slowed way down, and I would have been doing, doing this backtracking as carefully as I could, and I probably would have maybe taken this out and fixed it if I were trying to do it in the contrast thread. And so in general, I would say I do not do it in high contrast. So I think that that is everything I wanted to babble about in regards to these feathers. Those of you that have been stitching and drawing and trying to follow the guidelines about potato chips and round tops and hot dogs and touch and goes and so forth, I think as you look at your own feathers, you can start to see where those are. So I don't want to belabor the point of any of this too much. I just want to encourage you to go ahead and give some stitching a try. Obviously, as you go around or as you start in gentle curves like this, your feathers start to take on slightly different shapes. They're not all going to have round tops like this one here. If I go back to this drawing, if I tried to draw in a round top, you'll see I don't have a completely round top. It is a little bit flatter. But that's part of filling up the space of an inside curve. And that will become even more noticeable when we start working on deep curves next week, which is, and then we're also going to be picking up the pace from here on out. Because I've got a lot to cover now that we've got the basics under our belt. So I'll send you on your way. Thanks for listening to me ramble on for a little bit, and we'll see you in the forums.